Hey guys, and welcome to the video. To celebrate SCCM's 25th birthday, and on the basis of how popular my other SCCM videos are, I put together a new video on how to set up SCCM 1702. Now, we're going to be installing this on SQL 2017, so at the time of recording, this is the very latest in software. I'm going to be using a third-party tool which makes setting up SCCM very fast, very quick, and a lot less tedious than it was in the past. So what are we waiting for? Let's see how it's done. Okay, so we have a freshly prepared VM, which I have set up with 4 processors, 16 gig of RAM. We've got a couple of different drives set up for SQL, so SQL itself, for the database, SQL logs, and also an SCCM content drive. So we'll install SQL first and kick that off. We'll jump over to the bits and pieces that we need to customize, and then we'll move on to the next section. So we want a SQL standalone installation. Accept the terms, which then brings you to the feature installation. Now, what we're going to have is the database engine and full search. Now, remember, reporting and management tools are not included, so they'll be installed afterwards. Which brings us nicely to the accounts section. So what we're going to be using is domain-based accounts. So we've got an account on our domain already set up. So in my case, it's Service SQL. And we also want to use that same account for the database engine. Put the passwords in and also switch the startup type to automatic. Change the collation to Latin CP1 CIAS. Hit OK. Enter your domain accounts that are going to be accessing the database. So in this particular instance, I always use a domain admin so that we always have a backup plan to get in. I'm going to add myself, or you would add in a SQL group that would be used for users to access. Go over to your data directories and change the location for the drives that we created. Now we haven't got the drives available at the moment, so we'll just quickly format these. So now we've got as drives created, we've got SQL database on F, logs on G, and our SCCM content will sit on H. So we are going to go to change that to F, change that to G, and put the backups in a sensible location, ideally into another drive or C drive. Hit next. Remember to take a copy of your configuration file if you need to look at the installation at another time or install the same setup elsewhere, and then hit install. So that'll go off and take about 15-20 minutes to install, and then we'll be ready to look at the prerequisite tool. So once SQL has successfully installed, now the fun begins. So you want to download yourself the SCCM Prerequisite Tool, and the link is in the description. So you want to install this tool, and this basically installs everything that you need depending upon what sites you're installing from, primary site, secondary site, as well as any extras that you need for roles. So you can install management points, distribution points, catalogs. And this really takes the human error out of making sure that the components are set up to get SCCM actually working in the first place. So as we're building a primary site, the first thing we'll do is primary site, hit install. That will now go off and set up everything that we need for the primary site. Now, I'm going to be installing distribution points and management points separate from the primary server. And the reason for doing that is based on experience. Now, I've had a few scary moments with primary sites and distribution points going wrong in server 16, and obviously having the two together, I wasn't overly happy. So what I did was built out a separate VM and put distribution point and management point on there. And then if those roles go wrong or the VM goes wrong, it's very easy just to delete and redistribute back to a new VM without affecting the primary site. So that's the reason for doing that. And in this particular video, I've set up a distribution point using Server 16 Core. So that's the PowerShell only. So it's very clean, very fast, very secure, and also runs on a lot less resources. So we'll cover that once SCCM has actually finished setting up. Now, one of the beauties is while this is running, we can actually go sort out our Active Directory as well. So if you've never had SCCM running before, then you need to prepare your Active Directory to work inside SCCM by extending the schema. Now, for this to work, you need to make sure you're logged on with the domain user, which I am, and we should just be able to hit detect, and it will pick up our domain controller, which it has. So we need to get hold of the SCCM installation media, first of all, to install the software, but also to find the schema software. So what we'll do is we'll copy that to the C drive, first of all, which is here. We're going to be installing 1702. So once that's copied across, what you want to look for is the location of SMS setup bin x64. So once you've done that, hit stage. That's because I've already done it before. And then once you're ready, hit extend. If you have privileges on the domain controller, you can specify alternative credentials, which is done in settings. You can set your login details there. And then we can see Active Directory schema has been successfully extended. We also had a message saying that all our roles for primary site have now been installed as well. Now, remember, we're doing distribution and so on, management points, etc., on a different server. So I'm only installing the roles for primary site. Next thing to do is to install the ADK. Now, if we load up, we can see the latest version at the moment is 1709. So once we've got that, we then hit install. If you've already got it downloaded, then you can also point it to the location of where your installation files are. So we'll hit install. And that will go off, install all the necessary parts that we need, and do it in the background for us. So as you can see, that's successfully installed. So we're now going to do a reboot. So once we come back online, the next thing we're going to do is SQL Server configuration. Now, we can't configure SQL until the Management Studio is installed, so that's what we're going to do next. Now, this is just a simple next installation. So we're going to be installing version 17.3, which is at the time of recording the latest edition, and this goes through without any issues with SCCM. So we'll install this and we'll come back when it's done. So once the Management Studio has been installed, then do a reboot. Now, we won't be able to configure the SQL settings until SCCM is installed because it hasn't created the database, so we'll come back to that section afterwards. Now, depending upon where your updates are, you might already have a SUS server already running, or you might want to install SUS services onto the primary site. Now, same as the distribution and management points, it is always better to keep the primary site to a minimum, but if you was to install it, then there is a section in the tool under WSUS, so you can choose here whether you want to use the Windows internal database or you can use a SQL server. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to select a SQL server and then hit install, and then that'll install the update services role for us. And then once that's installed, we can then go to post configure and then enter the details there. So once that's finished installing the role, go over to post install. We're going to set the server to localhost. So after localhost, we just need to create the folder for SUS content. Now it's probably better to use we'll use a separate drive actually, just so I can roll this back later, because I already have a SUS instance. Now I'm going to make the drive quite big because there's a lot of patches. So once we've added the drive, go into disk management, bring the drive online. Create a folder. And then point. And then hit configure. If we go over to that drive and have a look, see what's going on, we can then see starting to install. Now the configuration of SUS is done through SCCM itself, so we won't be doing anything more here. So for the primary site, that is everything done. We can proceed now with the installation, and hopefully, fingers crossed, everything will work first time without any errors whatsoever. As we can see, 1702, and hit install. Now we are going to be using a primary site, so we put a tick in the box. Just use a evaluation for now. Accept all your license terms. Now we have to download some prerequisites, so we'll just create a folder for that. At 1702 pre. Oops, that was the math. Hit next. Let that download. We can also see that our SUS is finished as well, which is good. So we can hit continue on that, and we can actually close that down now. So we want to give our primary site or your entire organization a site code. I always use primary site 1, but you might want to use your company's short code or But remember, site codes can never be changed, ever. So once it's set, it's set. So we give the site a name, so we just call this HQ. Install into the default location. You might want to put it on a different drive if you wish. Change it there. Hit next. We want SCCM to update itself. Now, as of the 1607 edition of SCCM, SCCM is now done within the console. They're not installed separately. So this is what this is about. And we want to specify the name of the server, which is already done for us. And then we hit next. And that is pretty much it. Hit next. And hopefully it should go through. Now we ran through and we got a couple of errors on bits, which is fine because that's used for management and distribution points. We haven't installed that on here. We haven't changed the memory allocation on SQL, and also permissions for Active Directory. So let's go back to our Prerequisite Tool. Now, under the directory, we'd extended the schema. We also need to create the container and permissions. So let's create that while we're here. So hit create. That's fine. That's what we've done last time. So that should go through. And then permissions. So we have an SCCM admin group, which is picked up. So anybody who's part of this group will be able to manage. Hit configure. Right, that's fine. That's done. So to rectify the SQL memory allocation fault, what we'll do is we'll load up the Management Studio. Log in. What you want to do is if you right click on the server name and go to properties, here under memory. Now it was saying it requires a minimum of 8 gig, so we'll give it that. And for me and my particular setup, I'm going to set the maximum to 8 gig as well. So as we can see, that's now gone away. I still have some issues here, but that's primarily because I've had SCCM on my Active Directory before, and the machine name is exactly the same. So I'll sort that out. You wouldn't see that if you, as long as you've done your schema extensions and your systems management container. So once that's done, hit begin install. And then the whole process will begin. This takes around an hour to install. I've got it down to about 50 minutes, but it's around about an hour. So while that's installing, I'm going to do some SQL checks. Now, the SQL Server needs to be told what to connect to. So if we go into settings, we have the SQL database here, which is going to be localhost. And it says it's successfully established a connection, which is good. Go over to SQL Server, and then hopefully we should be able to validate some details. So we've validated our collation, which is correct. And also here you can actually configure your memory. So rather than going into the Management Studio, you can just do it that way. It's much quicker. And then we have SCCM fully installed. So the first thing we're going to do is load up the console. We're going to go over to Administration, go to Updates and Servicing, and as we can see, it's already pulled down 2 fixes to be done. So this upgrades the site to 1706. Now, under normal circumstances, we would run a prereq check just to make sure it will go through and then install. So as we can see, all of the update and servicing is now done within the console. We don't need to be loading any outside applications. It's all just done from inside here. So moving on to the next section of the video, we have already set up another VM for distribution and management point. Now I've installed this with Server 16 Core, and the reason for doing that is primarily for its low resource use. It's very secure, it's very fast, and we don't really have a need to access distribution points manually. So Core Edition is a good candidate. So if we run a program called sconfig, it will allow us to change the name, add it to the domain, change any network settings, allow updates, etc., etc. So I'm going to change the name of the machine first of all, because it's still on its default. And restart. Now you see how fast this is going through, look how quick that booted. And that's what you want. So we're going to copy the prereq tool to there. Now, unless you've got predefined firewall settings, what you'll find is if you try to ping it, it won't respond. And that's primarily because the firewall is up. So what we're going to do is enable file and print services through the firewall. As we can see, it's now responding. Which will then allow us to copy our prereq tool So once that's copied across, and there we go. So on this particular machine, we're going to go over to roles and we want to install management point. So hit install. After some time, that finishes successfully. Now we're also going to set this up as a distribution point. Now a lot of these roles are similar, so there'll be a lot of crossover. So the more roles that you install, the faster they'll go through. So this application will assume that you are only installing that one, so it'll attempt to install the same roles again, but then they'll say, no, it's okay, they're already installed. So we'll let that go through and we'll come back. So that's finished successfully and is installed 24 roles, as you can see. So for distribution point, a lot of it wasn't installed again. So it was only web scripting and file server and RDC. Now, also for distribution points, because they work as pixie points, they rely on an installation of ADK. So yet again, you have to install the latest edition, which is 1709, and then hit install. Once that's finished, they're the only two roles I'm going to be putting on to this particular server. Obviously, if you're using it for deployments, state migration, application catalog, then you would install these roles as well. It might be worth putting on application catalog actually as well. So we'll just do that quickly. I don't think that there's much extra to install because we've already got .NET and web. There's 34 roles with that one. And we can install that at the same time as doing the ADK. What we can do is we can load up Task Manager and you can actually see what's installing there. So what we'll do is we'll come back when this is all finished and then we'll add it into SCCM. One of the final things to aid troubleshooting is firewall. So it might be worth, because when you install this as maybe a secondary site, then it may install a SQL Express instance. You need to set up SQL firewall ports. It can be quite time consuming to go through the Microsoft site to go through what ports are for what roles and so forth. So you can do that, in your own time. But to aid troubleshooting, what you can actually do is if you run this command, to get net firewall profile, that will allow you to disable the firewall. Preferably run it in PowerShell because it's a PowerShell command. And that'll aid your troubleshooting, but do remember to put the firewall back on when you've finished. So those features have been installed successfully. Now, obviously with normal server, creating disks and so on is quite easy through the GUI. So because this is a distribution point, we need somewhere to be able to store packages and shares. So what we're going to do is, well, actually, before we do this, so inside PowerShell, if I show you get disk, that should show us how many disks we have. So if we go to settings and we create 2 further disks, now these, for things that I do, have to be pretty big drives because they're storing quite a bit of data. We'll create another one. Now if we run get disk, we should see we have 2 raw offline disks. So the disk numbers are 1 and 2. So we have to initialize the disks. So we enter initialize disks 1 and 2. As you can see, the status has gone from offline to online. Next thing we're going to do is partition them. So we say new partition disk number 1, use the maximum size and give it a drive letter, which is E. And we want to do the same again for 2. And then finally format those drives. So those drives are now ready and online. So when we actually go to install the role on SCCM, we'll be able to identify which drives to put content and shares onto. So let's swing back over to our SCCM server. So under administration, sites configuration, servers and site roles, what we want to do is if you right click on that and say create site server, now we want to put in the name of the server we just created. Put a tick in that box. It helps speed things up a bit when the site goes offline. We're going to use the computer's installation account. Select the site code. Hit next. Now here's what we select, what we've just installed basically. So we've installed all the prerequisites to make those roles work. Now we're actually going to install the roles. So we're going to install distribution point. We are going to install a management point and also application catalog, web services and website point. Then hit next. And this is where we now go through the installation and configuration of these components. So distribution point, I want you to install IIS. Yes, we do. I'm just going to use HTTP for this. Here we go, drive settings. So primary content, we were going to be using E, and secondary content location would be F, and the share primary is going to be F and E. So we're saying basically put all the shares onto F, all the contents onto E, and you can use the opposite drives as a secondary backup location. We were setting that to 512 because you don't want the drive to run out of space completely. I haven't got any other distribution points in this setup. So, but if you was copying content from one to another, this is where you would be putting it. Pixie support. So this allows your laptops, desktops to boot from that host and install any operating systems that you have. I won't be doing this. Hit next. Probably worth validating content, but set it as a lowest priority and set it on a weekend. Boundary groups. So boundary groups and boundaries is where the site is located. So if it's in a particular office, that particular office will have a subnet range. So this is for basically ring fencing resources to assets. So we haven't got any boundary groups because we've only just installed it. But we'll say HQ. We say anything to do with HQ group is assigned that server. So you're saying basically use the primary site here, hit OK. Now we'll cover boundaries and boundary groups later. Management point. So we're only going to use it on HTTP. We're not using HTTPS. And you also want to generate an alert when it's not healthy. So that'll actually flag up on the console to say that there is an issue, usually with IIS. Hit next. Use the site database and use the computer's management account. We're going to use default website and we're also going to use default name. Hit next. Now all these are pre-populated already, so that's good. So hit next. TESTLAB. Let's give it a little magenta color. Hit next. And now that will then go off and actually configure that server. One last final point I'd like to make with these secondary site servers is you've got multiple drives to install software on. There may be an instance where you don't want SCCM installing things. So SCCM will use whatever drives it can on the server that you've installed it from. But if there's a particular drive, like C drive, for example, you don't want content going on there, then what you can do is you can just create an empty file in the root folder called no_sms_on_drive.sms. So simply creating that file will prevent SCCM from installing any content. Now, because of file extensions and server core, this is actually called it sms.txt. So I'm going to rename that file. Better. So as long as that file is present, doesn't have to have anything in it, then SCCM will not touch that drive. I promised earlier in the video that we would be covering some of the configuration, so we'll do that now, including the boundary groups. So under administration, what we want to do first of all under hierarchy config is basically you want to set it to discover your environment. So in our particular instance, what we're going to do is we're going to say go off and discover any systems, so any servers you've got. So when you double click on it, enable system discovery. And what you can do is by clicking on the little sun is you can narrow it down to a particular OU, or you can say the whole, just search everywhere. So we can say go through computers and then recurse, use the systems account, and we can run that. Oh yes, we do want to run it now. And what the stat's doing is under assets and compliance, under devices, these will start to populate with the servers that you have. So go back into discovery. We can also do a user discovery, so we'll enable that, go to the little sunshine, and we will give it our users OU. And same thing again, and also run a discovery. Now what you can actually do is you can set the how often it does it through Delta Discovery, through the polling schedule. And you can also fine tune it down to particular Active Directory attributes. And that's also the same for system discovery as well. So same thing again, and click OK. Wanted to discover the domain, so we'll say yes to that. Automatically create site boundaries when they are discovered. Now you may or may not want to do this depending upon the size of your site, and you also want to automatically create IP ranges. Now hopefully this will get the boundary groups correct itself, but you can obviously go through and amend as necessary. Now next one, boundaries. Now we don't have anything in there at the moment, and default groups is the one we created when we installed it, HQ. So at the moment there's nothing assigned, and we have one site server. So we have our distribution point. So what you're saying is basically anything that comes under HQ group will basically use that site server. So what we can do is we create a boundary, and you've got a nice little range. You've got subnets, Active Directory sites. So I can say subnet. So I'll say home or lab, whatever you want to call it. I want to say anything under 192.168.1.0, 255.255.255.0. Anything under here will basically be part of that group. So what we're saying is that anything under that IP address, that subnet range, will be tied to that group. Now, database replication is for when we're creating secondary sites, and that replicates out the SCCM database to those sites. We've not done that here, so we won't see anything. File replication we won't see because it's, yet again, it's secondary sites. Now, Active Directory Forests has now come up with elm.local, which is also part of the discovery methods. So under assets and compliance, under devices, we can now see that that discovery of systems is now actually picking up the servers that we already have on that domain. And given time, there's no settings at the moment, but given time, they will populate with details about the servers. It's currently querying the servers and so forth. So going to users, we should find me, as I'm the only user on there. So we can see that the discovery methods are functioning okay. Well, as for a installation video, that's as far as I'm going to go. So I hope you found it informative. Please do give me a thumbs up, and also subscribe to the channel if you want to see more SCCM videos. I cover lots of things to do with System Center, DPM. I will be covering Orchestrator, Service Manager, etc. So please do subscribe if you want to keep seeing hot videos like this one. Until next time, see you later.